Hey peeps, Tyler here. I'm going to be diving into the book The War Against Boys by Christina Sommers, the new and revised edition, which came out in 2013. The first edition was published in 2000. I got this from the library, so I wrote down notes, and I'll be reading some stuff from it. This is going to be a long one, so settle in if you want to watch this. Grab a drink if you want, a snack. For context, because it's relevant here, for those new here, hi, welcome. I'm a trans man. I'm 36, over 2 years on testosterone. I grew up as a girl/woman, granted with dysphoria. Do with that what you will. I could see misandry was a thing when I still thought I was a woman. But since transitioning, I see it so much more, and I can see it getting worse. And yes, misogyny is a thing as well. I'm not denying that. There are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. In order to defeat one, you must attack both. Girls and boys are different. Yes, there are exceptions which will be mentioned, but in general, they are different. That's okay. We need each other. Supposed to be complementary, not at war. Yet, since transitioning into a man, all I see around me is hatred towards men. It's like, in order to be myself and thrive, to actually finally want to live and be happy, I gave up the right to be seen as human. It's the most important right of all, if you ask me. There are ways I never was like a girl. There are also ways I was because hormones and shit. And now that I'm on testosterone, I can feel the differences. I'm still me, still human, but hormones do control a lot, and to deny the differences is to harm children and also, therefore, our future. So with that, I'm going to get into the book. Maybe I should read the synopsis. An updated and revised edition of the controversial classic, now more relevant than ever, argues that boys are the ones languishing socially and academically, resulting in staggering social and economic costs. Girls and women were once second-class citizens in the nation's schools. Americans responded with concerted efforts to give girls and women the attention and assistance that was long overdue. Now, after 2 major waves of feminism and decades of policy reform, women have made massive strides in education. Today, they outperform men in nearly every measure of social, academic, and vocational well-being. Christina Sommers contends that it's time to take a hard look at present-day realities and recognize that boys need help. Called provocative and controversial, impassioned and articulate, the Christian Science Monitor, this edition of The War Against Boys offers a new preface and 6 radically revised chapters, plus updates on the current status of boys throughout the book. Sommers argues that the problem of male underachievement is persistent and worsening. Among the new topics, Sommers tackles how the war against boys is harming our economic future, and how boy-averse trends such as the decline of recess and zero-tolerance disciplinary policies have turned our schools into hostile environments for boys. As our schools become more feelings-centered, risk-averse, competition-free, and sedentary, they move further and further from the characteristic needs of boys. She offers realistic, achievable solutions to these problems that include boy-friendly pedagogy, character and vocational education, and the choice of single-sex classrooms. The War Against Boys is an incisive, rigorous, and heartfelt argument in favor of recognizing and confronting a new reality. Boys are languishing in education, and the price of continued neglect is economically and socially prohibitive. So, that is. Of course, I know 2013 is still over a decade away. Unfortunately, I only see things appear to be getting worse from what I can tell. So. Although many educators recognize that boys have fallen far behind girls in school, few address the problem in a serious way. Schools that try to stop the trend through boy-friendly pedagogy, literacy interventions, vocational training, or same-sex classes are often thwarted. Women's lobbying groups still call such projects evidence of a backlash against girls' achievements and believe they are part of a campaign to slow further female progress. The recent advances of girls and young women in school, sports, and vocational opportunities are cause for deep satisfaction. They should not, however, blind us to the large and growing cohort of poorly educated young men in our midst, boys who are going to be lost in our knowledge-based economy. To address the problem, we must acknowledge the plain truth. Boys and girls are different. Yet in many educational and government circles, it remains taboo to broach the topic of sex differences. Gender scholars and experts still insist that the sexes are the same and argue that any talk of difference only encourages sexism and stereotypes. In the current environment, to speak of difference invites opprobrium, and to speak of boys' special needs invites passionate, organized opposition. Meanwhile, one gender difference refuses to go away. Boys are languishing academically, while girls are soaring. In the first edition of The War Against Boys, I focused primarily on how groups such as the American Association of University Women, the Wellesley Centers for Women, and the Miss Foundation were harming our nation's young men. These organizations and their doctrines are still very much with us, but in this revised edition, I described the emergence of additional boy-averse trends, the decline of recess, punitive zero-tolerance policies, myths about juvenile super-predators, and a misguided campaign against single-sex schooling. As our schools become more feelings-centered, risk-averse, competition-free, and sedentary, they move further and further from the characteristic sensibilities of boys. Paul Capon, president of the Canadian Council on Learning, acknowledges the political temptation to avoid or deny the problem of male underachievement. Still, he says you have to ask what is happening and you have to ask why. It's a head-in-the-sand, politically correct view to say there's no problem with boys. In the United States, our education establishment remains paralyzed with its head in the sand. The subtitle of the first edition was How Misguided Feminism is Harming Our Young Men. The emphasis on misguided, I did not intend to indict the historical feminist movement, which I have always seen as one of the great triumphs of a democracy, but some readers took the book to be an attack on feminism itself, and my message was lost on them. In this edition, I have sought to make a clearer distinction between the humane and progressive women's movement and today's feminist lobby. That lobby, too, often acts as a narrow, take-no-prisoners special interest group. Its members see the world as a zero-sum struggle between women and men. Their job is to side with the women, beginning with girls in the formative years of childhood. Most women, including most equality-minded women, do not see the world as a Manichaean struggle between Venus and Mars. The current plight of boys and young men is, in fact, a women's issue. Those boys are our sons. They are people with whom our daughters will build a future. If our boys are in trouble, so are we all. This book explains how it became fashionable to pathologize the behavior of millions of healthy male children. We have turned against boys and forgotten a simple truth. The energy, competitiveness, and corporal daring of normal males are responsible for much of what is right in the world. No one denies that boys' aggressive tendencies must be mitigated and channeled toward constructive ends. Boys need and crave discipline, respect, and moral guidance. Boys need love and tolerant understanding. But being a boy is not a social disease. So that was some of the preface. It talks about a school aviation high, which is mostly, but not entirely, male, because it's airplanes and engineering. Girls are welcome. It's 15% girls. Now, it seems simple to me. More guys are into that stuff than girls. Yet the girls who are into it are welcome. So, what is the problem? Apparently a lot to certain women's groups. Yet there are other similar schools for other vocations. Why did you choose aviation? I asked Ricardo, a 9th grader. I liked the name. The world of aviation, the classes with a lot of hammering, welding, riveting, sawing, and drilling, seems to resonate more powerfully in the minds of boys than girls. At the same time, it is girls who are overwhelming majority at 2 other New York City vocational schools, the High School of Fashion Industries and the Clara Barton High School for Health Professions, are 92% and 77% female respectively. Despite 40 years of feminist consciousness raising and gender-neutral pronouns, boys still outnumber girls in aviation and automotive schools, and girls still outnumber boys in fashion and nursing. The common-sense explanation is that sexes differ in their interests and propensities, but activists and groups such as the American Association of University Women and the National Women's Law Center beg to differ. The DOE's Trends in Educational Equity report was based on more straightforward criteria. grades, test scores, and college matriculation. By those standards, girls were doing far better than boys. The DOE's National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, analyzed 44 concrete indicators of academic success and failure. About half of the indicators showed no differences between boys and girls. For example, females are just as likely as males to use computers at home and at school, and females and males take similar mathematics and science courses in high school. Some favored boys, they do better in math and science tests, and they enjoy these subjects more and demonstrate greater confidence in their math and science abilities than girls. Trends in educational equity found that the math and science gaps were narrowing, but they still singled them out as areas of concern. On the whole, however, girls turned out to be far and away the superior students. According to the report, there's evidence that the female advantage in school performance is real and persistent. As the study's director, Thomas Snyder, told me almost apologetically, we did not realize women were doing so well. A few sample findings. Female high school seniors tend to have higher educational aspirations than their male peers. Female high school seniors are more likely to participate in more after-school activities than their male peers, except for participation in athletics. Female high school students are more likely than males to take advanced placement examinations. Females have consistently outperformed males in reading and writing. Differences in male and female writing achievements have been relatively large, with male 11th graders scoring at about the same level as female 8th graders in 1996. Females are more likely than males to enroll in college. Women are more likely than men to persist and attain degrees. It has an average GPA of 12th graders by sex, as it shows females higher than males. Contrary to the story told by the Girl Crisis Lobby, the new study revealed that by the early 1990s, American girls were flourishing in unprecedented ways. To be sure, a few girls may have been crashing and drowning in the sea of Western culture, but the vast majority were thriving in it, moving ahead of boys in the primary and secondary grades, applying to college in record numbers, filling the more challenging academic classes, joining sports teams, and generally outperforming boys in the classroom and extracurricular activities. Subsequent studies by the Department of Education and the Higher Education Research Institute show that far from being timorous and demoralized, girls outnumber boys in student government, honor societies, and school newspapers. They also receive better grades, do more homework, take more honors courses, read more books, eclipse males on tests of artistic and music ability, and generally outshine boys on almost every measure of classroom success. At the same time, fewer girls are suspended from school, fewer are held back, and fewer drop out. In the technical language of education experts, girls are more academically engaged. As a figure, percentage of high school sophomores who arrive at school unprepared by sex, came to school without books, came to school without paper, pen, or pencil, and came to school without homework. Males are worse at everything. Parents began noticing that young women were sweeping the honors and awards at junior high and high school graduations, while young men were being given most of the prescriptions for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I have ADHD, I know it's real. However, I think a lot of that isn't actually ADHD, because as this book ends up showing, their needs aren't being met. Even as children, boys have more testosterone than girls, and they need recess and more hands-on activities as a general rule. That's been shown again and again. Girls and boys do, in general, learn differently. And if you stick with me, like I said, this will be long. There's going to be a lot more to this at some point. What motivates the women's lobby? It is not hard to understand why women's groups have invested so much effort in thwarting the cause of boys. When they look at society as a whole, they see males winning all the prizes. Men still prevail in the highest echelons of power. Look at the number of male CEOs, full professors, political leaders, or consider the wage gap. As the AAUW says, the most compelling evidence against the existence of a boys' crisis is that men continue to out-earn women in the workplace. Why worry about boys doing better in school when they appear to be doing so much better in life? This is an understandable but seriously mistaken reaction. First of all, most men are not at the pinnacle of power. The spread phenomenon we see in testing shows up in life. There are far more men than women at the extremes of success and failure is more common. There may be 480 male CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, 20 women. Again, this is a bit outdated, so I don't know what the numbers and stuff are now. 438 male members of Congress, 101 women, and 126,515 full professors, 45,571 women, but consider the other side of the ledger. More than 1 million Americans are classified by the Department of Labor as discouraged workers. These are workers who have stopped looking for jobs because they feel they have no prospects or lack the requisite skills and education. Nearly 60% are men, 636,000 men and 433,000 women. Consider also that more than 1.5 million, 1,500,278 men are in prison. For women, the figure is 113,462. Finally, a word about the infamous wage gap, which represents one of the most long-standing statistical fallacies in American policy debate. The 23-cent gender pay gap is simply the difference between the average earnings of all men and women working full-time. It does not account for differences in occupations, positions, education, job tenure, or hours worked per week. When mainstream economists consider the wage gap, they find that pay disparities are almost entirely the result of women's different life preferences, what men and women choose to study in school, where they work, and how they balance their home and career. A thorough 2009 study by the U.S. Department of Labor examined more than 50 peer-reviewed papers on the subject and concluded that the wage gap may be almost entirely the result of individual choices being made by both male and female workers. In addition to differences in education and training, the review found that women are more likely than men to leave the workforce to take care of children or older parents. There were so many differences in pay-related choices that the researchers were unable to specify even a residual effect that might be the result of discrimination. And as economists frequently remind us, if it were really true that an employer could get away with paying Jill less than Jack for the same work, clever entrepreneurs would fire all their male employees, replace them with females, and enjoy a huge market advantage. In 2006, the Portland Press-Herald ran an alarming series of reports about the educational deficits of boys in Maine. Among its findings, high school girls outnumber boys by almost a 2-to-1 ratio in top 10 senior rankings, and men earn about 38% of the bachelor's degrees awarded by Maine's public universities. According to the report, boys both rich and poor had fallen seriously behind their sisters, but the director of women's studies at the University of Southern Maine, Susan Fainer, expressed frustration over the sudden concern for boys. It is kind of ironic that a couple of years into a disparity between male and female attendance in college becomes, oh my god, we really need to look at this, the world is going to end. I can sympathize with the professor's complaint. Where was the indignation when men dominated higher education decade after decade? Maybe it is time for women and girls to enjoy the advantage. That is an understandable but misguided reaction. It was wrong to ignore women's educational needs for so long and cause for celebration when we turned our attentions to meeting those needs. But turning the tables and neglecting boys is not the answer. Why not be fair to both? Obviously, I'm pausing to either take a drink or to find the next part. So, these rewards are already in evidence. In major cities across the United States, single women ages 22 to 30 with no children now earn 8% more than their male counterparts. According to the latest census data, since 2007, the number of young men ages 25 to 34 living with their parents shot up from 14.2% to 18.6%. For young women, the rates have remained steady, around 10%. The Population Reference Bureau notes the share of young men living at home has reached its highest level since the Census Bureau first started tracking the measure in 1960. And then it has a figure 7 top towns for women, percentage in which median full-time wages for single childless women ages 22 to 30 exceeds those of single childless men in the same age group. You have Atlanta, Georgia at 21%, Memphis, Arkansas, MO, which I think is Missouri, at 19%, or whatever, New York City, northeastern New Jersey, 17%, Sacramento, 16%, San Diego, 15%, Miami, and somewhere in Florida, 14%, Charlotte in North Carolina at 14%, LA, 14%. Here, you can see it. The report's treatment of the gender gap in the Elite Advanced Placement AP program is typical of the entire study. In 1985, boys and girls took AP courses at nearly the same rate. Around 1990, the girls moved ahead of boys and never looked back. By 2012, AP enrollment was 56% female. How do you turn that into bad news for girls? The authors of Gender Equity in Education found a way. They mentioned without elaboration that girls outnumber boys in enrollment in AP Science, AP Foreign Languages, and several other AP subjects. And then they get down to business. Bullet point. In AP Mathematics, however, boys have consistently outnumbered girls by up to 10,000. The longitudinal graph emphasizes the point, but there are no bullet points or graphs, showing that girls have consistently outnumbered boys by up to 32,000 in biology, 56,000 in history, and 206,000 in English. Why don't the lower male numbers count as disparity and underrepresentation? Because they do not fit the shortchanged girl narrative promoted by the women's lobby. Unfortunately for boys, that narrative has been adopted by the federal government and other influential quarters of the American education establishment. On page 40, it starts talking about how schoolyards are now risk-free. No tag, no tug of war, now it's tug of peace, which I've never heard of before. No competition at all. It's boring and alienates boys, who need healthy competition to thrive, as it's been shown over and over. Competition can be healthy, teach that instead. They really are coddling children, which is so weird to say, but they are. For example, in May 2002, the principal of Franklin Elementary School in Santa Monica, California, sent a newsletter to parents informing them that children could no longer play tag during the lunch recess. As she explained, the running part of this activity is healthy and encouraged. However, in this game there's a victim or it, which creates a self-esteem issue. Seriously? I was a sensitive, fragile child, and I could play tag without thinking it was an insult if I was it. That is absurd. It's tag. Not calling the child an it. Even children can understand the game of tag. Or did children get really, really dumb right after I was a child? I don't think that's what happened. Anthony Pellegrini, a professor of early childhood education at the University of Minnesota, defines rough and tumble play, R&T, as a behavior that includes laughing, running, smiling, jumping, open hand beating, wrestling, play fighting, chasing, and fleeing. This kind of play is often mistakenly regarded as aggression, but according to Pellegrini, R&T is the very opposite. In cases of schoolyard aggression, the participants are unhappy, they part as enemies, and there are often tears and injuries. Rough and tumble play brings boys together, makes them happy, and is a critical part of their socialization. Children who engaged in R&T, typically boys, also tended to be liked and to be good social problem solvers. Says Pellegrini, aggressive children, on the other hand, tend not to be liked by their peers and are not good at solving problems. He urges parents and teachers to be aware of the differences between R&T and aggression. The former is educationally and developmentally important and should be permitted and encouraged. The latter is destructive and should not be allowed. Increasingly, however, those in charge of little boys, including parents, teachers, and school officials, are blurring the distinction and interpreting R&T as aggression. This confusion threatens boys' welfare and normal development. Such attitudes may help explain why boys are 4.5 times more likely to be expelled from preschool than girls. Fortunately, there were champions of R&T among the teachers in the study. As one said, rough and tumble play is inevitable, particularly with boys. It seems to satisfy innate physical and cultural drives. As long as all participants are enjoying the play and are safe, I don't intervene. Play is the basis of learning in all domains. Play is, indeed, the basis of learning, and the boys' superhero play is no exception. Researchers have found that by allowing bad guy play, the children's conversation and imaginative writing skills improved. Such play also builds their moral imagination. It is through such play, say the authors, that children learn about justice and their personal limits and the impact of their behavior on others. Logue and Harvey ask an important question. If boys, due to their choices of dramatic play themes, are discouraged from dramatic play, how will this affect their early language and literacy development and their engagement in school? There are studies showing R&T is beneficial and necessary. Also, recess has been eliminated in many schools. Even my elementary school, in the 90s, barely ever had recess, and I started kindergarten in 1994. So literally, I started middle school in 2000. The move to eliminate recess has aroused some opposition, but almost no one has noticed its impact on boys. It is surely not a deliberate effort to thwart the desires of schoolboys. Just the same, it betrays a shocking indifference to their natural proclivities, play preferences, and elemental needs. Girls benefit from recess, but boys require it. Ignoring differences between boys and girls can be just as damaging in creating differences where none exist. Were schools to adopt policies harmful to girls, there would be a storm of justified protests from well-organized women advocates. Boys have no such protectors. It's hurting their health. More boys are obese, which it also has a graph for that. There is so much feminist misinformation. If you're not a man, let me ask you, how would you feel if you were treated as a criminal, an aggressive rapist, from a very young age, just a young child, for doing absolutely nothing wrong, just for existing? How would you feel? Misandry is alive and well, and like I said earlier, misogyny and misandry are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. In order to defeat one, you must attack both. Two wrongs don't make a right. Also, self-fulfilling prophecies are incredibly real, so we have got to cut the shit out. My message is not to let boys be boys. Boys should not be left to their boyishness, but should rather be guided and civilized. It has been said that every year civilization is invaded by millions of tiny barbarians. They're called children. All societies confront the problem of civilizing children, both boys and girls, but particularly boys. History teaches us that masculinity without morality is lethal, but masculinity constrained by morality is powerful and constructive, and a gift to women. Boys need to be shown how to grow into respectful human beings. They must be shown in ways that leave them in no doubt that they cannot get away with bullying or harassing other students. Schools must enforce firm codes of discipline and clear, unequivocal rules against incivility and malicious behavior. Teachers and administrators have to establish school environments that do not tolerate a gregarious meanness, sexual or non-sexual. These are demanding tasks, but they are not mysterious. We have a set of proven social practices for raising young men. The traditional approach is through character education, to develop a boy's sense of honor and to help him become considerate, conscientious, and gentlemanly. This approach respects boys' masculinity and does not require that they sit in sedate circles playing tug of peace, or run around aimlessly playing tag where no one is ever out. And it does not include making 7-year-old boys feel ashamed for playing with toy soldiers. Boys do need discipline, but in today's educational environment they also need protection. From self-esteem promoters, roughhouse prohibitionists, zero-tolerance enforcers, and gender equity activists who are at war with their very natures. A Wellesley College Equity Seminar. In 1998, the Wellesley College Center for Research on Women sponsored a day-long teacher training seminar entitled Gender Equity for Girls and Boys, a conference for K-12 teachers and administrators. It attracted 200 teachers and administrators from the Northeast. Teachers received state recertification credits for attending. One session, Dolls at Gender and Make-Believe in the Early Childhood Classroom, was concerned with sex stereotypes and how to defeat them. It was led by Dr. Nancy Marshall, a senior research scientist and associate director of the Wellesley Center, and 2 of her associates. According to Marshall, a child's sexual identity is learned by observing others. As she noted, when babies are born, they do not know about gender. Since newborn babies know very little about anything, Marshall's comment was puzzling. They don't know their blood type either, after all, but they still have one. Marshall explained that gender, indeterminate at birth, is formed and fixed later by a process of socialization that guides the child in adopting a male or female identity. Which sounds an awful lot like they're saying that they can make a kid whatever gender they want. According to Marshall and her colleagues, a child learns what it means to be a boy or girl between the ages of 2 and 7. In those early years, the child develops a gender schema, a set of ideas about appropriate roles, attitudes, and preferences for males and females. The best prospects for influencing the child's gender schema are in these early malleable years. These years are the opportunity zone. Marshall and her associates presented a slideshow explaining a young mind is like Jell-O. We learn to fill it up with all the good stuff before it sets. What counts as good stuff for the Wellesley pedagogues is making children as comfortable as possible participating in activities traditionally associated with the other gender. One favorite slide, to which they repeatedly referred, showed a preschool boy dressed up in high heels and a dress. It's perfectly natural for a little boy to try on a skirt, they said. The group leader suggested that teachers use water and bathing to encourage boys to play with dolls, acknowledging that preschoolers tend to prefer same-sex play, which reinforces gender stereotypes. They advised teachers in the audience to force boy-girl mixed pairs in a follow-up discussion. One of the participating teachers boasted of her success in persuading her kindergarten-aged boys to dress up in skirts. Another proudly reported that she makes a point of informing boys that their action figures are really dolls. At no point during this eight-hour conference did any of the 200 participating teachers and administrators challenge the assumption that gender identity is a learned, socially constructed characteristic. Nor did anyone mention the immense body of scientific literature from biologists and developmental psychologists showing that many male-female differences are natural, healthy, and by implication best left alone. On the contrary, everyone simply assumed that preschool children were malleable enough to adopt either gender identity to suit the ends of equity and social justice. The possibility that they were tampering with the children's individuality or intruding on their privacy was never broached. I'm a trans man. No, your prepubescent child doesn't know they are trans. However, being transsexual isn't a choice. Neither is being cis. And as far as I'm aware, that's a really old scientific term. That's all I mean it as. Do you see how this crap can confuse children? The things I keep seeing online, the insanity is getting worse. If you don't know what I'm talking about, good for you for managing to somehow ignore all the insanity. Though I'd like to know what rock you're living under. I have nothing against a boy who wants to wear a skirt. By all means, if he wants to, let him. However, I do have something against forcing a boy to wear a skirt. Let kids be themselves, for fuck's sake. Early interventions. Throughout the 1990s, equity activists in the Department of Education promoted a national effort to liberate children from the constraints of gender. The Women's Educational Equity Act Resource Center, a national center for gender fair materials maintained by the Department of Education, distributed pamphlets that confidently asserted the social origins of femininity and masculinity. Here, for example, is a passage from the center's guide entitled Gender Equity for Educators, Parents, and Community. We know that biological, psychological, and intellectual differences between males and females are minimal during early childhood. Nevertheless, in our society, we tend to socialize children in ways that serve to emphasize gender-based differences. In fact, we know no such thing. Play preferences of chimps versus monkeys and other primates parallel those of children. A special issue of Scientific American in the spring of 1999 reviewed the evidence that these play preferences are, in large part, hormonally driven. Doreen Kimura, a psychologist at Vancouver's Simon Fraser University, wrote, "We know, for instance, from observations of both humans and non-humans, that males are more aggressive than females, that young males engage in more rough-and-tumble play, and that females are more nurturing. How do these and other sex differences come about?" Kimura points to animal studies that show how hormonal manipulation can reverse sex-typed behavior. When researchers exposed female rhesus monkeys to male hormones prenatally, these females later displayed male-like levels of rough-and-tumble play. Similar results are found in human beings. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, CAH, is a genetic defect that results when the female fetus is subjected to abnormally large quantities of male hormones, adrenal androgens. Girls with CAH consistently prefer trucks, cars, and construction sets over dolls and play tea sets. It appears, says Kimura, that perhaps the most important factor in the differential of males and females is the level of exposure to various sex hormones early in life. These sorts of findings undermine the simplistic view that gender-specific play is primarily shaped by socialization. Oh look, it looks like it might even explain trans people, such as myself. And humans are animals, by the way. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean literally, we're mammals. And we see other mammals, including our closest relatives, act the same way. It's hormones, people. Hormones. Advocates for single-sex education don't like the parallel with racial segregation, but the parallels are there. No, they are not. Mandatory racial separatism demeans human beings and forecloses on their life prospects. Single-sex education is freely chosen, and millions of pupils have thrived intellectually and socially within it. Boys and girls, taken as groups, have different interests, propensities, and needs, and they and their parents and teachers know it. The teacher who begins the day with "Good morning, boys and girls" is being friendly and conventional, not invidious and oppressive. There are same-sex schools that people choose to go to, as well as vocational schools that are largely one sex but have some of the other as well, and co-ed schools with some same-sex classes. These are freely chosen and are shown to have great success. Feminists would make shit up, say things about girls and women being disadvantaged or victims or oppressed, only to make up studies they thought would affirm them, but then the studies kept proving the opposite. Instead of coming clean, they just kept lying. Because obviously I don't want to go through every frickin' page. But, others would do studies that contradicted the feminists' predictions. In some areas, it's clear they think women and girls are better than boys and men. Girls and boys, men and women, yes, we're different. Yes, we're also a lot alike. Both of these things are true at the same time. Both human, but also hormones matter. Quite a lot, actually. Still human, though. The differences are okay to acknowledge. We need each other. No, I'm not homophobic. It's okay to be gay. But as a society, we need women and men. We have different strengths, and that's a good thing. None of us are islands. Some of the studies weren't well done, or were even kept a secret, never shared despite being repeatedly asked. There's just a whole bunch of nonsense in this book. Not the book that I think you get at this point what I'm saying. Nonsense with real harmful consequences for boys. And there are times when the author gives credit where it is due, by the way. The lies, however, kept getting worse and believed by society. Granted, many of them believe their lies, which gives them fuel. They also ignore biology and science that we know of. Eventually, studies were abandoned altogether. They just expect you to believe what they say and believe now. No questions asked. Gilligan's direction. What are we to make of Carol Gilligan's contribution and influence? Her earlier work on the different moral voices of males and females had some merit. Her demand that psychologists and philosophers take into account the possibility that women and men have different styles of moral reasoning was original and interesting. As it turns out, the differences are less important than Gilligan predicted. All the same, her suggestive ideas on sex and moral psychology stimulated an important discussion. For that, she deserves recognition. Her later work on adolescent girls and their silenced voices show us a different Gilligan. Her ideas were successful in the sense that they inspired activists in organizations like the AAUW and the Miss Foundation to go on red alert in an effort to save the nation's drowning and disappearing daughters. But all their activism was based on a false premise, that girls were subdued, neglected, and diminished. In fact, the opposite was true. Girls were moving ahead of boys in most of the ways that count. Gilligan's powerful myth of the incredible shrinking girl did more harm than good. It patronized girls, portraying them as victims of the culture. It diverted attention from the academic deficits of boys. It also gave urgency and credibility to a specious self-esteem movement that wasted everybody's time. Gilligan's later work on boys is even more removed from reality. The myth of the emotionally repressed boy was taken seriously by many educators and led to insipid, dispiriting school programs designed to get boys in touch with their feelings. More ominously, it led to increasingly aggressive efforts to insist that boys behave more like girls, for their own sakes and for the supposed good of society. In this call for deliverance, Gilligan has been joined by some prominent male disciples, with their own research, extravagant claims, and proposals for rescuing a nation of stricken young hamlets. It goes more into the self-esteem movement as well as how boys in general actually think. Different, not bad or wrong. Talking about feelings often seems impractical to boys. Instead, we could be fixing shit. And frankly, I think a balance would benefit people in general. It's okay to talk about your feelings and cry, yes, if that's what you need. Bottling shit up isn't healthy. But often people don't process and go through the emotions that way, they just wallow in it, which isn't healthy at all and makes it worse. And yes, I think feminists have severely patronized girls. Jumping ahead for a minute, in 2012, University of Missouri psychologist Amanda Rose and her co-authors published a study in child development that tested the Gilligan-Pollock assumption that boys were fearful and ashamed of sharing their feelings with others. Rose and her colleagues surveyed and observed nearly 2,000 children and adolescents and found that boys and girls have very different expectations about the value of problem talk. Girls were more likely to report that personal disclosure made them feel cared for and understood. Boys overall found it to be a waste of time and weird. Contra Pollock and Gilligan, boys did not feel embarrassed about sharing feelings and were not filled with angst about being ridiculed or teased for being weak or unmasculine. Instead, said the lead author Amanda Rose, boys' responses suggest they just don't see talking about problems to be a particularly useful activity. Rose has sound advice for parents. If you want your son to be more forthcoming, it won't help to make him feel safe about sharing confidence. You will have to persuade him that it serves a practical purpose. As for daughters, she warns excessive problem talk is linked to anxiety and depression, so girls should know that talking about problems isn't the only way to cope. And I'm sorry, but I have to say that before, as a woman, all the talking about my feelings and crying all the time, that was me, not all women. Just talking about me there. Didn't help. I wallowed in my feelings, and all it ever did was make it worse. That's it. That wasn't coping. That was depression. Exactly like it says, I lived that. Freely expressing all my emotions only ever made me miserable and depressed. Recently, I've stopped doing that, and now I'm happy and thriving. I know I'm one person, but for me it's true. I'm still working on it and already seeing results. Please note, that's not to say never express emotions. It depends on the situation, context, and all that. It's a learning process. It isn't black and white. At this point in my life, I don't think anything is. Also a bit interesting to think about. But Pollock needs to show, not merely assert, that it harms a child to be called upon to be tough. Why shouldn't boys, or for that matter girls, try to be sturdy oaks? All of the world's major religions place stoical control of emotions at the center of their moral teachings. For Buddhists, the ideal is emotional detachment. For Confucianism, I don't think I said that right, dispassionate control. My apologies if I get any words or names wrong. Nor is be in touch with your feelings one of the 10 Commandments. Judeo-Christian teaching enjoins attentiveness to the emotional needs and feelings of others, not one's own. Actually, going back a little bit from where I just was. Pollock also expressed concern about the boys' apparent confusion about masculinity. A high percentage of his boys agreed with statements such as, "It is essential for a guy to get respect. Men are always ready for sex." He pointed out that these are the very same boys who said they believed men and women deserve equal pay, and boys and girls should both be allowed to express feelings. Pollock took these responses as evidence that the boys are hostage to a double standard of masculinity. He concluded these boys reveal a dangerous psychological fissure, a split in their sense of what it means to become a man. This is unpersuasive, to put it mildly. We might well find teenage girls telling us that it is essential for a girl to get respect. As for men are always ready for sex, why should any psychologist find it startling that adolescent boys agree with that? There is massive evidence, anthropological, psychological, even endocrinological, abundantly corroborated by everyday experience, that males are, on the whole, primed for sex and more ready to casually engage in it than females are. And this begins in adolescence. One well-known experiment compared male and female college students' responses to invitations to have casual sex from an attractive stranger of the opposite sex. 70% of males said, "Okay, let's do it," and almost all seemed comfortable with the request. Of the females, 100% said no, and a majority felt insulted by the proposal. To recognize that males tend to welcome sexual opportunities is not to say that boys endorse an exploitative promiscuity. Given the biological changes boys are undergoing, their eagerness is natural and not unhealthy. On the other hand, society correctly demands that they suppress what is natural in favor of what is moral. So most parents try to teach their sons to practice responsible restraint. Pollock regards the boys' positive responses to men are always ready for sex as an indication that something is deeply wrong with them. While this response may indicate some confusion among today's young men about right and wrong, nothing in it suggests any kind of psychological disorder. Pollock's reaction tells us more about his own limitations as a reliable guide to the nature of boys than it does about what boys are really like. So the whole, if you agree with, it's essential for a girl to get respect, but for some reason find it is essential for a guy to get respect, upset you? You need to think about that, seriously. Because I know there are people that if you say it is essential for a girl to get respect, that the girls agreed with that, they'd be like, yes. Which like, yes. But as soon as you say the exact same thing, it is essential for a guy to get respect, oh hell no. Oh hell no. And if that's you, well, I'm sorry, but fuck you. I'm not really sorry. Cut out the double standard bullshit, because I ain't having it. And yeah, testosterone does make you a lot hornier. Signed, a trans man, 2 years on T, who accidentally at one point went slightly, just slightly, too high on T, and thought I was going to lose my damn mind. My libido was driving me nuts. Now my levels are fine, and I'm fine now. But my libido is still way higher than it used to be. I can even see old teen girl me also being offended at such a prospect. But me now? Depends maybe? I don't know. I do know I'm more easily ready to go than I used to be. In an earlier interview, Jack Ford, the co-host of NBC's Saturday Today, asked Pollock, "Should I sit down with my 11-year-old son and say to him, 'Look at what happened here down in Arkansas. Let me tell you why. Part of it is your makeup. Part of it is how we've been bringing you up. Now let's sort of work through this together, or is it too late for that?'" Pollock did not tell Ford that it would be wrong to suggest to his son that he too is capable of killing people. Instead, he replied, "I think we should do that with 11-year-old boys. I think we should start with 2 and 3 and 4 and 5-year-old boys and not push them from their mothers." This is a remarkable exchange, one that would be inconceivable if the children under discussion were girls. No one takes disturbed young women like Susan Smith, who made headlines in 1994 when she drowned her 2 sons by pushing her car into a lake, or Melissa Drexler, the New Jersey teenager who, in 1997, gave birth to a healthy baby at her senior prom, strangled him, and threw him in a trash bin, as tip-of-the-iceberg exemplars of American young women. Girl criminals are never taken to be representative of girls in general, but when the boy reformers generalize from school killers to our sons, they're including your son and mine as well, as Jack Ford's and Maria Shivers. Would it ever occur to Jack Ford to ask a psychologist whether he should sit down with his daughter and say to her, "Look at what happened at that New Jersey prom. Part of it is your makeup, part of it is how we've been bringing you up. Now let's sort of work through this together." Pollock sees the killer boys at the extreme end of a continuum that includes everyday boys. To the contrary, what is typically striking about killer boys is their extreme abnormality. 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson, one of the 2 Jonesboro, Arkansas shooters, practiced self-mutilation and was also undergoing court-ordered psychological counseling for molesting a 2-year-old girl. Kip Kinkle, as a 15-year-old boy who shot classmates in Springfield, Oregon, had been diagnosed with major depressive disorder. The night before the school shooting, he killed his parents and spent the night in his house with their dead bodies, playing opera music from Romeo and Juliet continuously. As for the Columbine High killers, they were sociopaths inspired by the example of Timothy McVeigh, the domestic terrorist who blew up the Oklahoma City Federal Building, killing 168 people and injuring 680. By putting all boys pushed from their mothers onto a continuum with the school shooters, Pollock does not adequately distinguish between healthy and unhealthy young men. Before we call for radical changes in the way we rear our male children, we ought to ask the boy reformers to tell us why there are so many seemingly healthy boys who, despite having been pushed from their mothers, are nonviolent, morally responsible human beings. How do those who say boys are disturbed account for the fact that in any given year, less than 0.5% of males under 18 are arrested for a violent crime? With the help of the media, Pollock's explanation for adolescent male violence in schools contributes to the national climate of prejudice against boys. That is surely not his intention. It is, however, an inevitable consequence of his sensationalizing approach to boys, treating healthy boys as if they were abnormal and abnormally violent boys as the extreme end of one large pattern. By taking a small, unhappy minority as representative of an entire group, the writers present the groups themselves as pitiable, incompetent, and unworthy of respect. Pollock, for example, wants to rescue boys from the myths of boyhood, but unwittingly harms them by arousing public fear, dismay, and suspicion. In characterizing boys as Hamlets, he stigmatizes an entire sex and age group. His seemingly benign project of reconnecting boys to their inner nurturers pressures boys to be more like girls. The effect is to put boys on the defensive, not an incidental effect, as we shall see. England and Australia also have a boy gap, but unlike the US, they've been working on it. Back in the USA, American boys have a lot in common with their counterparts in England and Australia. In all 3 countries, boys are on the wrong side of an education gender gap, but there is one major difference. It is inconceivable that reports on a US boy gap would emanate from the US Congress. A successful boys campaign would create havoc in the United States. The women's lobby would rise in fury. The ACLU would find someone to sue. Legislators would face an avalanche of angry faxes, emails, petitions, and phone calls for taking part in a backlash against girls. And imagine the uproar if the U.S. Department of Education were to compile a list of boy-friendly reading materials, or even suggest that teachers might familiarize themselves with such things. That would be an affront to decades of non-sexist curriculum development. Mark Barleen, former director of research at the National Endowment for the Arts, and Sandra Stotsky, professor of education at the University of Arkansas, summed up why Johnny won't read in a 2005 Washington Post op-ed. Unfortunately, the textbooks and literature assigned in the elementary grades do not reflect the dispositions of male students. Few strong and active male role models can be found as lead teachers. Gone are the inspiring biographies of the most important American presidents, inventors, scientists, and entrepreneurs. No military valor, no high adventure. On the other hand, stories about adventurous and brave women abound. Publishers seem to be more interested in avoiding masculine perspectives or stereotypes than in getting boys to like what they are assigned to read. I've heard of the booktube community so much, and I agree with. Give kids stuff they want to read first, so they fall in love with reading. If you want kids to fall in love with reading, you need to give them books they'll enjoy first. For some reason nowadays, boys don't count. Let kids have a variety of books to choose from, for boys and girls. Yes, in high school, teach them books so they can learn to think critically, but before that, you have to teach them to love reading. Also, I heard they stopped teaching phonics before. How do you learn to read without knowing how the letters sound, aka phonics? You can't. As soon as you come across a word you don't know, you're lost. Because some schools are only teaching to memorize words now, apparently? Seriously? That's not reading. Not at all. Phonics enables you to sound out words you don't know. Or to at least try, like the way I'm probably butchering somebody's name. Vocational schools show promise, but the women's lobby strikes back. Despite their success and promise, vocational academies like Aviation High School and Blackstone Valley Tech face harsh opposition from the women's lobby. In a 2007 report, the National Coalition for Women and Girls in Education, NCWGE, condemned high school vocational training schools as hotbeds of sex segregation. The NCWGE is a consortium of more than 50 groups that lobby for girls' rights in education. Members include the AAUW, the National Women's Law Center, the ACLU, NOW, the Miss Foundation, and the National Education Association. Girls and boys enroll in these programs in roughly the same numbers, but they tend to pursue different fields. According to one NCWGE report, girls are largely absent from traditional male courses, comprising only 4% of heating, AC, and refrigeration students, 5% of welding students, 6% of electrical and plumber pipe fitter students, and 9% of automotive students. At the same time, they account for 98% of students enrolled in cosmetology, 87% of childcare students, and 86% of health-related fields. Such enrollment patterns, they say, reflect at least in part the persistence of sex stereotyping and sex discrimination. But what if they reflect preferences? What if girls are not that interested in refrigeration or welding compared to early childhood education or nursing? We can all agree that career and technical programs should do what they can to attract and engage female and male students in non-traditional occupations. Electricians can earn more than childcare workers. The girls should know this. Indeed, they probably know it all too well. According to Allison Fraser, a curriculum specialist at Blackstone Valley Tech and author of the Pioneer Institute study on Massachusetts programs recruiting more girls into non-traditional fields, non-trads for short, is an overwhelming preoccupation at schools like hers. It is all we think about, Fraser told me. She describes Blackstone Valley Tech girls pressured to sign up for auto body and machine shop programs, who then come to her in tears, saying they just don't want those careers. Says Fraser, "We do everything we can to promote non-traditional fields. We bring in successful women welders and electricians. We counsel the girls and their parents about the benefits of traditional male fields. We force them to explore fields outside their interests, but we cannot force them into a career they don't want." Fraser's emphasis. Why are vocational schools going to such lengths to persuade girls to become welders rather than nurses? Because state and federal equity officials require them to. Under the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, first enacted in 1984, the U.S. Department of Education disperses $1.1 billion annually through the states to secondary schools and colleges for vocational and technical training. The act requires schools to take aggressive measures to persuade young women to enter non-traditional fields. Career and technical schools live in fear that with too few non-trads, they will fall short of their Perkins number, an elusive, non-specific, and ever-changing gender quota. As Fraser told me, it is not enough to get girls to explore new areas. We have to get them to sign up and get them to stay there. And the requirements are about to become even tougher, moving toward precisely defined gender goals and quotas. As mentioned earlier, boys and girls are often into different things, different fields. They do allow the gender that isn't usually into a certain field into it. The few that are welcome. So what is the problem? Instead, they're just making girls miserable and calling it feminism. Yes, make the girls miserable, that's feminism. Okay. Education should help kids get into careers that interest them, not try to force around pegs into square holes for an agenda, one that is proving to be harmful to everyone. Introducing divisive gender politics into schools like Aviation High and Blackstone Valley Tech is the last thing we should be doing. While it is true that fewer young women than men enter fields like engineering, aviation, and automobile repair, young women are soaring in areas such as biology, psychology, and veterinary medicine. In 2010, women held 64% of seats in graduate programs in the social sciences, 75% in public administration, 78% in veterinary medicine, and 80% in health sciences. Will the federal government demand Title IX investigations in those female-dominated programs? Will our high schools and colleges be taken to task for doing a far better job educating girls than boys? Not likely. There is no national coalition for boys in education, no lobby promoting changes in the Perkins Act or Title IX to help them, and unlike in England and Australia, no political leader has spoken out publicly on their behalf. So, moving on, she goes on to talk about some boys who did truly awful things, including rape, and how the adults in their lives failed them because they'd had bad behavior their whole lives, since 5 years old and younger, and never disciplined. Not by their parents, their teachers, police, no one. So it kept escalating. Boys, all kids, but especially boys, need discipline and moral education. Because boys are by nature more physically aggressive, less risk-averse, and more prone to rule-breaking, the communication has to be clear and explicit. Boys, as a rule, require a form of character education that places strong behavioral constraints on them, constraints that many progressive educators feel we have no right to impose on any child. I'm sorry if the pausing is an issue, but obviously it's already going to be long. If I didn't do that, it would be even longer. But ironically, the next fashion in progressive pedagogy, student-centered learning, was soon to leave the Kohlbergians and the values clarifiers far behind. The new buzzword was self-esteem, and by the late 1980s, it had become all the rage. Ethics was superseded by attention to the child's personal sense of well-being. The school's primary aim was to teach children to prize their rights and self-worth. In the old days, teachers would assign 7th graders to write about the person I admire most. Now students were assigned to write essays celebrating themselves. In one popular middle school English text, an assignment called "The Nobel Prize for Being You" informs students that they are wonderful and amazing, and instructs them to create 2 documents in connection with your Nobel Prize. Let the first document be a nomination letter written by the person who knows you best. Let the second be the script for your acceptance speech, which you will give at the annual awards ceremony in Stockholm, Sweden. For extra credit, students can award themselves a trophy that is especially designed for you and no one else. I'm sorry, but that is gross. I hate to say it, but this explains so much. No wonder Gen Z or Alpha seems so narcissistic these days. My generation and older created them. Just imagining how someone who was told to do those kinds of assignments over and over would act? Yeah, that fits. And no, I'm not saying hate yourself. You can love yourself without being narcissistic. In fact, I think they might actually be contrary. Regardless, you can love yourself and be humble at the same time. The moral deregulation that the progressive educators called for took hold in the very decades they saw a rise in conduct disorders among boys in the nation's schools. Where the reformers go wrong. Those who oppose directive moral education often call it a form of brainwashing or indoctrination. That is sheer confusion. To brainwash children undermines their autonomy and rational self-mastery, and diminishes their freedom. To educate them and to teach them to be competent, self-controlled, and morally responsible in their actions increases their freedom and deepens their humanity. The Greeks and Romans understood this well, as did most of the great scholastic and Enlightenment thinkers. It is the first principle of every great religion and high civilization. To know what is right and act on it is the highest expression of freedom and personal autonomy. What Victorians had in mind when they extolled the qualities of a gentleman are the virtues we need to teach our children. Honesty, integrity, courage, decency, politeness, these are as important to the well-being of a young male today as they were in 19th century England. Even today, despite several decades of moral deregulation, most young men and women understand the term gentleman and approve of the ideals it connotes. Far from being oppressive, the manners, instincts, and virtues we recognize in decent human beings, in the case of males, the manners, instincts, and virtues we associate with being a gentleman are liberating. To civilize a boy is to allow him to make the most of himself. And good manners and good morals benefit the community more than even the best of laws. As Edmund Burke advised, manners are of more importance than laws. Upon them, in a great measure, the laws depend. The law touches us but here and there and now and then. Manners are what vex and soothe, corrupt or purify, exalt or debase, barbarize or refine us by a constant, steady, uniform, and sensible operation. Common sense, convention, tradition, and modern social science research converge in support of the Aristotelian tradition of directive character education. Children need clear standards, firm expectations, and adults in their lives who are loving and understanding, but who insist on responsible behavior. So no, she isn't saying to be cruel like some might think. We're getting there. Aristotle in Idaho. Positive Action is a character education program, founded in 1982 by education scholar Carol Gerber Allred. Today, more than 11,000 schools, 2,500 districts, and 2,000 community groups have adopted it. The K-12 curriculum consists of teachers' guides and scripted lessons, along with a variety of age-appropriate games, music, posters, stories, and activities. Lessons are taught 15 minutes a day throughout the school year. When the Department of Education carried out an evaluation of 41 leading character education programs in 2007, Positive Action was the only one to receive its seal of approval. Positive Action is the one ethics program included in the department's influential What Works Clearinghouse, WWC. The WWC considers the extent of evidence for positive action to be moderate to large for behavior and for academic achievement. In the late 1970s, Allred was teaching high school in Idaho and became discouraged by her students' lack of engagement and ambition. Many were confused about basic ethics and had little understanding of work ethic. I just knew they could do better, she told me. In response, Allred developed a character education system based on her readings in psychology, philosophy, and her appreciation of Idaho farm values. She asked herself, what do these hard-working, self-reliant, and honorable farmers know, and how can I teach it to my students? She came up with a simple formula, which she named Positive Action. According to several carefully designed studies, her formula works. These studies found that positive action improved behavior, increased academic achievement, reduced suspension rates, and according to the WWC, reduced serious violence among boys. A third, more recent study found that positive action had favorable program effects on rating for African American males. The Positive Action curriculum is based on the old-fashioned idea that you feel good about yourself when you think and do positive actions, and there's a positive way to do everything. Its philosophy was crisply expressed by Abraham Lincoln. When I do good, I feel good, and when I do bad, I feel bad. Children as young as 3 or 4 are able to grasp this simple truth. The program teaches them how to stay inside the success circle, or happy circle for the younger children. The key is to fix on and hold positive thoughts and then act on them. Good feelings follow. But Positive Action is not an I love myself self-esteem program. Allred became disillusioned with the self-esteem movement when she realized it lacked moral substance. Positive Action directs children toward a set of core values, specifically trustworthiness, industry, kindness, and achievement. Children learn to pay close attention to how they feel when they are honest, hardworking, and kind, and they learn to avoid the vicious cycle that comes from cultivating bad thoughts, taking destructive actions, and feeling self-loathing. They become their own moral mentors. One goal of the program is to get kids hooked on self-improvement. Physical, moral, and intellectual, they are taught that it can be hard to stay inside the success circle, but intrinsically very rewarding. It may be tempting to shirk a demanding task, lie to a friend, or steal something from someone, but children learn to monitor the toll it takes on their psyches. They also learn the central lesson that comes down to us from the ancient Stoics. You don't have to be at the mercy of your thoughts and ideas. You can change them and improve them. As the first-century Greek philosopher Epictetus said, what upsets people is not things themselves, just their judgment about things. Through Positive Action, children learn to be mindful and careful of their judgments. Older students also study the lives of great individuals. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Florence Nightingale, Susan B. Anthony, Albert Einstein, the Dalai Lama, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, or Rosa Parks. They focus on the thoughts that lead them to take great actions. Allred's program is practical, mundane, and homespun, but it somehow captures the insights of the world's great moral traditions. What's more, it resonates with children. It is intuitive in them, Allred told me. Aristotle and Epictetus could not agree more. This Idaho educator may have found a way to equip children with a moral compass, and the means to find their way back to true north when they stray. In June 2011, an 11-year-old boy at Monterey Heights Elementary School in California gave a speech at graduation about how positive action had changed his life. He had once been a bully and a troublemaker and was failing his classes. The lunch lady tried to keep me from recess, so I cursed her out. He told his audience, "School was a prison to me, and teachers were just trying to keep me locked in. But something in the positive action curriculum reached him. He is now a positive action sumo. His grades are good, he has more friends, and he has emerged as a school leader. To all my future lunch ladies, I will not cuss you out." When a Michigan state official visited a positive action class at Tustin Elementary in Tustin, Michigan, she remarked to a coworker, "I can use this in my own life. We can all use it in our lives. But too many parents in schools simply fail to impart basic worldly wisdom to children. Positive action appears to be effective with both girls and boys, but today, with so many boys clueless about right and wrong, misdirected by the self-esteem movement and lacking ambition, it is just the sort of instruction they desperately need." Are men necessary? Asks New York Times writer Maureen Dowd. Yes, they are. Not because women lack the talent to do the things men do. Women can be just as formidable and enterprising as men when they set their minds to it. But fewer women than men do set their minds to it. The sexes are equal, but they exercise their equality in different ways. There is a well-known complementarity between the two sexes. They need each other. They have been known to love one another. How did we forget about these simple truths? They have even been known to love one another. How did we forget about these simple truths? And how have we allowed our society to become so badly rigged against boys? As part of our great relearning, we must again recognize and respect the reality that the sexes are different but equal. Each has its distinctive strengths and graces. Solutions exist, and she talks about them, stuff that's been tried, etc. I find this book very balanced and eye-opening, frankly, so I ended up giving it 5 stars, and I felt like a calling and like it was important to go through all of that because of reasons. So yeah, if you stuck with me this long, thank you for watching. It's taken longer to film it than it even is, so yeah. Thank you for watching. My link tree is in the description. It has my Goodreads, Storygraph, Substack, etc. My other YouTube channel that I've made, and yeah. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to. Comment down below, if there's something you want to talk about, or yeah. And have a nice day.